Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Breach Development Systems.
What attributes separate the common salesperson from a truly successful sales professional? Is it being a good talker, as we so frequently hear? Or is it the courage to call on anyone at any organization at any time? Is it some kind of superpower that they have? Or could it be something simpler than that? Maybe today you'll hear the secret that will transform your career as Scott and I welcome sales expert Brent Widman to discuss the importance of consistency on episode 542 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
All right, today we got a guest, so no book club, but we will be covering the Theory of Accountability, Part 3, chapters 13 through 16. I know it sounds like a big number of a lot of chapters, but
Only
they're
two
short.
pages, I think, some of them.
Yeah. So we'll be okay. You're going to be okay, and we'll pick up the book. So Theory of Accountability by Sam Silverstein, Part 3, chapters 13 through 16.
And if you haven't picked up the book yet, you're not very accountable. That's what I'd say.
No, it's not too late to start, as always.
Well, Brent Widman is a partner at Southwest Consulting, which is the speaking, training, and coaching division of the Southwestern family of companies. He leads a group of 155 certified professional sales and leadership coaches around the world. He's been with the 160-year-old Southwestern, 160-year-old, that's a long time for any company.
Wow,
a Southwestern family of companies for over 9 years, and he's got 17 more years of sales experience himself. He's been consistently in the top 5% for sales and revenue for the company and number one in 2021. Welcome to the Winning at Selling podcast, Brent.
Thank you, fellas. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me come on.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have you here. Full disclosure, as they say, Brent has been a speaker for our PSA group a couple of times. Been very well received, so we wanted to have him on the podcast. Brent, let's talk a little bit about your background as we get into this. What got you into selling? What was your first sales position?
Ooh, I started at Lifetime Fitness is where I started, of all places. A little background story. So obviously from Minnesota, and I didn't get hired in Chanhassen, Minnesota at the Lifetime. And I did get hired at the Plymouth one. And I made it sounds funny, but we all have to have our why and why we do things. And sometimes the why is I will show you. And I made it my mission to just simply work harder than everybody else because I wanted to prove you made a mistake to not hire me in this location and I could do it in this location.
Sometimes an angry salesperson.
Yeah, there it is.
You dirty louse. So was that a position that you enjoyed and you decided to do something more, something different, or what? How did that progress then through other sales positions and ending up with Southwestern?
For that, it taught me, not that I didn't have a work ethic, but it did teach me. I mean, in sales, we all have to make phone calls, really is what it comes down to. And at Lifetime, I did it. I really enjoyed it because it was the energy of there's always music, always people, always coming in and out. You get the motivation when you see people coming in to work out and leaving after they worked out, how they come in as kind of grumpy and leaving on top of the world, that type of thing. So
right.
And then to be straight up front, I started chasing the title, and I went to the YMCA as a sales director, and all of these were about 1.5 to 2 years. And then I went to Sprint as a district manager, had probably 7 stores here in Minneapolis. And then I went to Robert Half International and was the division director there for a couple of years. And all of these things were a couple of years. And while I was at Robert Half, I was on LinkedIn because we use LinkedIn really predominantly to recruit, really is what it was. I was recruiting accounting and finance people. And I saw the job description for this, really is what it was, the public speaking, training, coaching, development, all that type of stuff. And all I did is reach out and say, can you tell me a little bit about that? Well, 7, 8 interviews and all this stuff later, here I am.
They were begging you. They were begging you to come on board.
Yeah, that's what it was. They wanted that job hopper that they weren't sure was going to stay or not. That's what they were looking for. But I
Well, that
think of
brings
it.
up an interesting question in my mind. So you were sales director at 3 or 4 companies, you kind of banged them out. What do you see as, and this is going to lead into our topic of what makes a great salesperson, rather than, but what did you see that you had to repair the most with salespeople? Why were they not effective?
I think in all organizations, we see that you have the top person or top couple people, that kind of thing, that just they simply just go do it. And then you have the other group that we got to figure out. There's that movable middle. And I think that's kind of what you're asking. Why? What's behind that? And I think there is.
Yeah, there's only one thing to do with the dead weight.
Yeah, yep. And it's hard to do that because you become close with them or care about them and that
Yep.
type of thing. So they become your people in essence. And I've been guilty of that too. But what I see holding people back, and I tell people this when I hire them into Southwestern, because we do a lot of interviews and that kind of thing. And it's simply, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's ego.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, it's the ego of I don't want to ask for help or open myself up.
Mm-hmm. So I'm doing just fine. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That type of thing. And that's what I learned here, that when I just simply ask for help or reach out to people or open yourself up, you're not going to look stupid. It's not a bad thing. Because if you don't know something and they don't know you don't know, how are they ever going to help you with that thing to help you get to where you want to go? Because your goals and your success and your definition's different than mine, that type of thing. But I truly think that's one of the biggest things I see, especially here, and I've seen around, because I was that guy. Maybe that's why I say it. When I left the Y, my I'll never forget this. My executive director said, sometimes the best salespeople don't always make the best sales managers.
Oh, yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
There's a difference between doing and leading, and understanding the process versus committing to the behavior, with the role that you play. I've been in similar situations where, I worked for a big company, legal publishing company in town, and I got turned down for the job. And I was just so disappointed about that. And I saw another ad for another department, and I really committed to that role in that job, and I got hired. And it was always nice to pass the person who said no to me in the hallway on the way to the cafeteria. Hey, hi, good morning, good to see you. And then, what? How'd you get here? I thought I said no to you. And it's like, no, you said no to me, but somebody else said yes. And I love that intrinsic motivation that salespeople have to be able to commit to it and want it more than somebody not, inviting you to the party. I mean, you want to be at the party, and you want to be able to contribute to the company, and given the opportunity, you deliver great results. And I was the top sales rep 7 months out of 12. I was suspended for 2 for reasons of that we won't talk about, but I came back with a vengeance after being suspended for 2 months.
You touched on something in there when you said I was committed.
Yeah.
That's a mindset thing. That's like a shift.
Oh, it is.
Because we kind of hover for a while, I think, at times. Some of us do, not all of us. But when you commit, that's where things start to change. Like, I'm going to be here.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this.
I looked at my resume one day as I was job hopping after spending 18 months at 3 different companies. And I'm like, one person said, you have short timer syndrome. You can't commit to an employer. Mm-hmm. And as soon as adversity kicks in, you run and hide. And it's like, you're absolutely right. I do that. And when I decided to commit to something, I wasn't going to let the adversity overcome me. I was going to power through the adversity that I was experiencing, and I became a lot more skilled. I became a lot more committed and a lot more persistent. And I think when you're persistent with the prospect, you demonstrate value in the company and the services that you provide. And most of us sell services. So as salespeople, we have to demonstrate commitment by following through, being persistent, and asking good questions. And I'm really interested in some of the experiences and advice that you have for our listeners when it comes to being more consistent and more persistent, and really demonstrating that credibility that you have, and to be able to overcome all of those adversities. And, I touched on it a little bit about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, and successful salespeople are usually driven by intrinsic motivation. What would you say that really inspires you and motivates you, Brent?
Ooh, that's a big question.
Mm.
Man. So I'm going to go back to, again, I'm going to touch on something and then I'm going to come back to that question if that's all right. Because
Sure.
there's something you said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically what you were saying, when it got hard, you got out.
Yeah, exactly. That was me.
And how many salespeople, when it gets hard, we get out because it's easier to go to the next thing or not commit and go to the next job or find something else or the easy way. And that's kind of with every facet of our lives too. If it's hard, we get out. You ask about external or internal motivation. I tell this story from time to time that when I came here, I was not in a affluent situation, I guess. I didn't have a whole lot of money. Let's call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was about 6 months in, and I was thinking to myself, what the heck did I get myself into? I took a straight commission job. Here I am, fighting tooth and nail. My house is up for short sale. I'm driving my brother's 2000 Ford pickup, this kind of thing. And I remember this weekend, like it was yesterday, we went down to, it's called Lake City, and it's on the big part of the Mississippi. It's Lake Pepin. And it was a carnival in town that weekend. And it was me and my son, Jack. He was 6 at the time. And I knew that Friday night I was kind of uneasy or just like you're anxious, that kind of thing. And didn't think anything of it because I don't get like that very often. And that Saturday morning, we walked up to the carnival. And we all know the small town carnivals, the bumper cars, roller coasters, the rickety old Ferris wheel, that type of thing. And we're walking by the pitching game. And Jack is pleading with me, Dad, I play. Dad, come on. And I see the sign that says 3 balls, $5. And I kind of froze.
Yeah.
In my pocket, really, I had maybe 20, 30 bucks to my name at best. You count all the other things that we were struggling with and that kind of thing. And I ended up letting him play, and we labored through the weekend. And I got back that weekend, came home Sunday, went down to my office. And I just sat at my desk and I kind of sat there numb. And you talk about motivation. I started thinking about all the memories I was taking from him, all the things that he couldn't do, or even going to the pool or whatever it is, or just small stuff. And I wrote on a Post-it at one time, I wrote, how does it feel? Because I never wanted to forget that again.
Yeah.
And that's
powerful.
To this day, that's kind of the answer to your question. Is
I heard a speaker say once that motivation begins when your belly button and your backbone say hello.
Yeah.
And so, when you finally realize as a salesperson that if you don't start making some phone calls, you're not going to eat tomorrow, or you can't even go to McDonald's, much less a nice restaurant. That starts to bang into us a little bit. And Scott always talks about salespeople who have too high of a base salary, and they're too happy with their base salary, and that satisfies them, and they don't go out and do the work that it takes. And that's always a fine line, is figuring out how to help people get motivated. And not money isn't the total motivation, but as in your story, Brent, what it can do for us and what it does for our children, and what we can do with it for our family has a lot to do with motivation. So it's not that I want necessarily to drive the Lamborghini, but it sure would be nice to drive a car that the muffler isn't dragging behind. And so what do we do? What can we do to be more successful in selling? What do you think accounts for your success as you got off the schneid here and said, okay, I'm in sales, and that was 9 years ago. And now it's what am I going to do to make myself successful in this job, rather than claiming success as a sales manager? I think that's always a funny thing. Sales managers like to tell everybody how to sell, but don't always pick up the phone themselves. So now you're back to picking up the phone again.
Yep. We do have, I'll say that too, have a team of about 25 people. So it's back to the leadership thing as well. So we're practitioners first, right? Coaches, leaders second, that kind of thing. But You asked answering your question, man. You go back to what, why, all that kind of stuff. But it goes back to the money thing that you talked about, because money provides freedom, really is what it is when it comes down to it. But what changed? I think one of the first things that I did is I just made a lot of darn phone calls, really is what it came down to. And what do phone calls really lead to? When you talk to a lot of people, what starts to happen? One, you open up your network, you open up the realm, but it's also practice is what it is. You start to understand objections and what people say and how they say it and what you should say back. But that leads into almost being when you look at leadership, like I joked a little bit when we got on here, the books behind both of you, because you've read all of those, and even the book club you're talking about, becoming a student of the game. Like, how do you become a better leader? Immerse yourself and commit to what you want to do and how you want to do it, and start reading the books and listening to the podcasts and Audible. And I mean, there's coaches, trainers, seminars, mentors, Audible, books, podcasts, all these things that we can do to make ourselves better. And again, it goes back.
We really got to, and then we've got to really take that and start doing something with it.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And doing it on a regular basis. And we want to talk today about consistency. So what does consistency do for a sales professional? You were starting to talk about that. As you mentioned, we start to learn by doing and sometimes failing or not really achieving our goals, but we think, hey, listen, I made 10 phone calls and I didn't get anything done. I only talked to 5 people, but nothing happened. But that's not really true, is it? Something happened.
Something happened right there. That's the consistency factor. It's not hard to explain. It's showing up every day. We know that. And having I would say a purpose, but a plan of what you're going to do, in essence. And what I mean by that is when you block out all the noise and you consistently doing, whether it's in business, whether it's with family, whether it's with, let's call it working out too at the same time, you just consistently do these things, it's going to pay off. It may not pay off in the first 10 phone calls. It may take 1,000. But when you continue to do it over and over and over again, and it goes back to, I think that's what making all those darn phone calls at Lifetime Fitness taught me is, yep, a lot of people are going to say no. They're going to say they're not interested. And we can get caught up in that, or we can go looking for the open-minded people that truly do want to have a conversation that we can talk to, that, like I said, are open-minded to doing those things. But
at least to have the conversation, so we learn from the conversation, right?
That's it. That's all it comes down to. I talk a lot about, you get it, abundance, scarcity, that type of thing, but we all love yeses, because yeses make us money. We talked about that, but don't we have to learn to love no's as well?
Yeah, it's all part of the process of getting there.
Yeah.
I put together with clients that I work with a daily scorecard, and that is, what is the goal for the day? And you send that to me every morning, and then in the afternoon or the next morning, you send me your scorecard for the day that you're about to have, and then what was the outcome of yesterday. So in the morning you made a goal, and then at the end of the day you had an outcome. Are you going to be more committed to the goal, or are you going to be more accepting of the outcome? And too often I work with salespeople that tell me, here's what happened. But they really lose track of the morning when they have an opportunity to say, here's what's going to happen. And too often salespeople become reactionary and they let things kind of happen versus being proactive and make things happen. And every time I work with a salesperson, I say, what is your goal? And they come up with a goal, and it's in most cases realistic. It might be ambitious. And I go, okay, what are the distractions that you have to overcome to make sure that you achieve this goal? And there's where it gets real, is I got to be able to manage my distractions. And distractions can be long conversations after a goal is already obtained. in the phone call? What is the goal of the phone call? Once you reach the goal, saying, I really appreciate our time together. If there's anybody that that might be interested in working with somebody like me, I'd be grateful for an introduction. But let's stay in touch, and I'll call you here, or I'll follow up here, and whatever the next step is, and get off the phone. But a 15-minute phone call that can be handled in 5 minutes spends a lot of time that you lose and you never get back. I mean, your salespeople are in the hotel business, heads on beds. Once that time goes by, you never get it back, and you'll never get the revenue back.
So what do we want to know from Brent?
Want to be able to know, what do you focus on? What are you really committed to? How do you manage the distractions in the day? And then my big question is, you've been doing this a while. What changes have you seen in the marketplace over the last 17, 18, 20 years that you've been doing this, that salespeople have got to acknowledge in order to be able to deliver the results that they want and the people that they work with want?
That's a long question, Scott.
It is. Well, you asked for all of them. I'm going to give them all.
I got a couple.
Okay.
There's 20 questions in there, Brent. Answer any one of them that you like.
Got it.
Grab out of the one you like the most.
So you talked about, because you went from the beginning to the middle to the end, really is what you did, because you talked about putting our emotion into our activity, not the results.
Well, that's what you did when you were at the carnival with your son. That emotion, we all know salespeople buy, people buy emotionally, they justify it intellectually. Same thing with salespeople. We follow the same process of buying as prospects do when they come to buying. We have to buy a different behavior. But go ahead, Brent. Yep.
When you look at because so many of us, and I get caught up in it, so I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we got it all figured out, that kind of thing, because none of us do. But there are times we put our emotion into our results.
Absolutely.
That's where we ride this roller coaster a little bit, where if we take that out, and it goes back to the focus question you asked, when we focus on the work and the activity, the results are going to come with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we set that goal, and like you just said, breaking it down to making it manageable, or crystallizing it, if you will, to know what we need to do, that's where your goal card came into play. You wanted that person to send it to you because you wanted to see what they did on that day. The result was probably the 2-second conversation, as opposed to how did this go type of thing. And when you ask about focus in anything, where it's in sales, it's focus on, okay, what is my goal for the day? It's focus on making phone calls. It's focus on that conversation, and knowing that in that conversation, if, like you talked about, if I've reached the peak, well, then I need to slow down.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's focus on these things. I went so far. I'll tell you this, a quick story again. It was the end of 2020. And I was talking to one of my team members, and we were talking about goals and why didn't you hit them? What happened? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to do less of? What do we need to distractions, that kind of thing. And we talked through his, and then he turned it around on me. And he said, why didn't you hit yours?
Yeah.
And it hit me right in the face. And it goes back to, how do you manage the distractions?
Right.
Things had to change. I literally bought a mat, and it's hanging up in the corner of my office, that it just says focus. Because I knew at times, like on phone calls or any type of thing that you're having a conversation, I would let my mind wander, or email or text messages or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is. We just let our mind wander. And when you bring it back, that focus, if you've ever focused 100%, you know how engaged, like this conversation here, you know how engaged you are. When you haven't, people can tell, and they know it.
Yeah.
And those are the small things that it goes back to creating consistency. We can create those habits because we do it over and over and over again. And sometimes it takes just having a mat in your face, or a picture that says focus, or whatever it is, your word, purpose, intentionality, whatever those words are that help you. And we have to figure that out. And I think that's where we manage distractions. But we also have to, I think back to a lot of the things, because I work from home, have kids. So you have to set expectations as well, that you knock on the door, or this is the time I'm working. I'm not going to go walk the dog or do the laundry or dishes or whatever it is. Like, I'm in it. I'm in it.
I've worked out of my home for 30 years. And when we had our kids, my wife thought I was a built-in babysitter for whenever she wanted to leave in the afternoon. And I'm like, if they start crying and I have to deal with them, then that's my whole afternoon might be wiped out by that. And so I think that's really important. Talking about focus, I think it's interesting because one of the challenges I have is when you're making phone calls, you start to go by rote instead of thinking about the phone call individually and focusing on that real person. You're just going through it. You're just getting it done. You're just doing your 20.
Your tick mark.
And you say, okay, I did it, but you did it with such lack of enthusiasm that even when you got somebody on the phone, it wasn't going to go well. And then the other thing I do is the phone's ringing. I'm looking at the next name I'm going to call.
Yeah.
And then I forget who the hell I called when they answer the phone, So I think that's a focus problem too. But so one of the ways that we can become more consistent is to stay focused, right? Because we're talking about how to be more consistent. What other things can we do to be more consistent? I like to make lists, right? My daily to-do list and get that done. I like to have my names done before, because if I don't have my call list done, then my whole day is taken up making my call list instead of calling. So those are some things I do to be more consistent. What do you do to be more consistent, or what do you suggest for your team so they can move toward this consistency?
It's funny you say that. I literally just did a team call on Friday, and the thing I talked about was planning. And you just talk about a list. When you come into your day, I don't have to think about what I'm going to do throughout the day. I just don't. It is, and I'm not a robot. I don't want you to think that. That's not what I'm saying here. But my day is planned as such, because what happens when we start thinking about what we're going to do next? What do?
Lose focus.
We do. Email, text messages. Well, I might call this person, or I might call that person. But if we know what we're going to do, like if you ask me what I'm doing today, I could literally rattle off my whole day of what I'm doing today, even into tomorrow, into next. Well, you know what I'm saying here. Maybe not.
Right. Some of those things. Yeah, absolutely.
That type of thing. So it's planning.
Yeah.
Planning will create. I was talking to a mortgage leader the other day, and he just started a business, that kind of thing. And I asked him, what do you have on your calendar for tomorrow? Well, I have a lunch. And I said, that's all you have on your calendar? Well, I'm going to do some of this and some of this and some of that. And he wants to be $1 billion company. Well, how are you going to be $1 million producer, or whatever your revenue is, that type of thing, if you don't know where you're going? That's the biggest thing about consistency, is knowing what you're going to do when you come into work on a daily basis.
And I think if that list isn't big enough, then we feel like, okay, I can kind of fart around all morning, and now it's in the afternoon, and the afternoons disappear for me faster than anything. And if that list is big enough, it creates a sense of urgency. And I think that sense of urgency gets us moving. Oh my gosh, I got 15 things on this list. If I don't get going now, there's no way I'm going to complete this list today. So we need to create that sense of urgency and focus then that forces us to become consistent.
It's wrapping our mind around it. It really is.
Because the mind game, that's for sure.
If you have white space on your calendar, what do you think starts to happen?
Distractions.
Yeah. It really is. And that goes back to what you just said, Bill. It's my afternoon. I hear a lot of times, what are some of the excuses we make on a daily basis? And it's, I don't have time.
Right.
Right. To me, that's one of those things that drives me a little batty, because we're only as strong as our processor system.
And as Scott said earlier, time is the only value that we have. Right. It's the only resource that we're working with. And if we decide to waste some of it, it's gone forever. Scott, we need to wrap things up. You have any final questions here for Brent?
My final questions that I ask every guest when they come on the show is, I'm curious, what book you're reading, and also what person has had the greatest influence on your life. And this was based on the quote from Charlie Tremendous Jones, that is that you'll be the same person you are 5 years from today, with the exception of the books you read and the people that you meet. So how would you respond to that, Brent?
So what book I'm reading, and what was the other one?
Who are the people? Who is the person that's had the greatest influence on your life?
Okay. So what book I'm reading? I'm actually rereading Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
Oh, that's a tough book.
I'm
You feel like a weenie when you read that book.
I know. What I love
I'll run 20 miles with a broken foot. No problem.
Yeah.
That's just my warm up.
If you look at where he came from, killing bugs, and he was 350 pounds, that type of thing.
Yeah.
He made the decision, I can't live like this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the shift in mentality that we have, or that I'd love to create, that type of thing. And you talk about who's had the biggest impact on my life. There's a couple people, because I finally let them in. There's Dew Tinnen, who brought me into the business.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Elford, who just wrote Redefining Possible, one of my best friends that's a leader here at Southwestern, been here for about 30 years. And then there's family. There's my wife. There's my kids. There's just the people, you two, right? These types of people that have this impact on your life when you let them in.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's hard to pinpoint just one or two people, but those are probably the biggest ones, I guess I would cover.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure that people are going to get a lot out of this. Consistency is a difficult thing, but I think you're right. It is one of the keys to being a successful salesperson. So thanks so much for being on the show, Brent.
Thanks for letting me. I appreciate it, fellas.
Thanks, Brent. So as we wrap up the show today, the golden nugget: there are risks and costs to action, but there are far less than the long-range risks and comfort of inaction, by John F. Kennedy. And we need to think about that as salespeople. What is the cost of inaction? And I brought this up before, and I finally found a quote that somebody said it before I did.
You stole it from John F. Kennedy a long time ago.
I didn't realize it. I mean,
That's
he
right.
and I are connected. We're just kind of connected. Maybe I'm reincarnated.
That could be. It could be. Yeah. I think we do not count the cost of inaction enough. We see our life slipping away, and we don't even notice it until it's too late to do something about it. So don't waste that time. Get into action. You can find all this information at winningatselling.com. Next week, our book club, as Scott mentioned, is chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. They are not long chapters of the theory of accountability. And we're going to talk about how to get out of a slump. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.